0.5. Tonight, we dive into a story so ancient, so shrouded in mystery, that it could rewrite the very foundations of civilization. The Tower of Babel, a symbol of humanity's ambition, defiance, and divine punishment, holds secrets far darker than we've been told. But what if the true story isn't about a tower at all? What if it's about a language, a divine language, so powerful that its very words could reshape history and defy the boundaries of time itself? The Vatican, with its centuries-old grip on knowledge, has fought to control this truth, hiding, rewriting, and even censoring the language that could unlock humanity's lost past. But why? What do they fear? What would happen if the ancient language of Babel was ever spoken again? A language that could bridge the divide between the divine and the mortal. A language capable of shaking the very structure of power itself. The Vatican has long guarded this secret, locking it away, not in vaults, but in the very depths of its influence. But the truth, buried for centuries, is waiting to be unearthed. Tonight we uncover the forbidden tale of the Tower of Babel, divine language, and the Vatican's efforts to bury it all. Before you dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Have you ever wondered what humanity might have lost? Imagine a place so grand, it held the knowledge of the entire ancient world, a place where thinkers, scientists, and philosophers from across the known world gathered to share their ideas. This was the Library of Alexandria, a beacon of wisdom, built in the 3rd century BCE in the heart of Egypt. It was not just a library, but the world's most advanced center for learning. Scholars traveled from all corners of the globe to study here, immersing themselves in a sea of knowledge that spanned everything, from mathematics to astronomy, philosophy to medicine. The Library of Alexandria stood as a testament to human achievement, an intellectual powerhouse that held the secrets of the past, the present, and perhaps even the future. But what happened to this treasure trove of human knowledge? How did a place meant to preserve wisdom become a symbol of loss? In its prime, the Library of Alexandria was the largest and most important library of the ancient world. It housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls containing the wisdom of every civilization known to humankind at the time. But it wasn't just the scrolls that made the library special. It was the people who worked there. Scholars like Euclid, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes walked its halls, contributing to the progress of science, mathematics, and geography. The library was a place where the brightest minds could exchange ideas and push the boundaries of what was known. The sheer scale of the library was staggering. It wasn't just a building filled with books, it was a collection of the collective knowledge of the ancient world, constantly expanding and evolving. It was a place where knowledge flowed freely, and where the barriers between cultures, languages, and ideas seemed to disappear. But then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. The fall of the Library of Alexandria has been shrouded in mystery and legend. Some say it was destroyed by fire. Others claim that it was slowly lost over time, its scrolls and manuscripts gradually deteriorating in the face of neglect and the changing tides of history. No one knows for certain how it happened, but the result was the same. One of the greatest repositories of human knowledge was lost to the ages. The story of its destruction is one of the most tragic in history, a symbol of the fragility of human achievement and the price of ignorance. However, what if the loss of the library was not as complete as it seems? What if, before its destruction, some of its most valuable manuscripts were hidden away? secretly stashed in places we may never find, tucked away in vaults and crypts, preserved for a future that may never come. Could the library's greatest secrets have survived, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered? We may never know for sure, but the possibility that hidden knowledge exists, buried beneath the sands of time, is a thought that has sparked the imaginations of historians, archaeologists, and dreamers for centuries. As we begin this journey, we ask the question, what did the Library of Alexandria truly contain, and what of its knowledge might still be hidden from the world? Could there still be answers buried beneath the ruins of a legend? When the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century, much of the world was left in chaos. The great centers of learning, culture, and civilization that had once thrived in the empire seemed to vanish overnight. In the aftermath of Rome's collapse, Europe plunged into what would later be called the Dark Ages, a time of instability, confusion, and widespread ignorance. Yet, amidst this turmoil, a single institution began to rise in power and influence: the Catholic Church. With the fall of Rome, the Church became more than just a religious institution. It became the intellectual and spiritual center of Europe, a beacon of knowledge in a darkened world. The Church positioned itself as the custodian of truth, holding the keys to both faith and knowledge. But how did it come to hold such power? It wasn't just through its religious authority that the Vatican grew. It was also through the preservation and control of knowledge. In the absence of a unified government or educational system, the Church became the keeper of ancient texts, the last line of defense for intellectual progress. Monasteries, scattered throughout Europe, became centers of learning and scholarship. It was within these stone walls that monks painstakingly copied and preserved the works of ancient philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists, ensuring that the knowledge of the past did not completely disappear. The Church didn't just safeguard books, it redefined what was worth preserving. As the centuries passed, the Vatican's libraries grew, and with them, the Church's control over what people knew about the world. The manuscripts in the Church's possession weren't freely accessible to all. Only the clergy and select scholars had access to the sacred texts, and even then, the interpretation of these works was controlled by the Church. The idea of knowledge being something that belonged only to the elite was cemented. The Church's role as the keeper of knowledge was not just about preservation. It was about shaping the narrative of history. In a time when the written word was the most powerful tool for controlling thought, the Church used its influence to dictate what people could know and what they could not. It was in the Church's best interest to maintain the belief that it was the sole authority on all matters of faith and knowledge. The power of the Vatican was not only spiritual, but intellectual, and with this power, it controlled the narrative of history itself. As the centuries wore on, the Church's influence only grew. The Vatican became a central force in the development of Western civilization, shaping not only religion but also politics, education, and culture. But beneath this facade of benevolence, there were darker undertones. The Church's monopoly on knowledge meant that any attempt to challenge its authority was seen as a threat. Scientists, philosophers, and even ordinary citizens who dared to question the Church's teachings often faced persecution. Yet, despite these dark chapters, the Vatican's growing power set the stage for the future, when the pursuit of knowledge would once again be set free. For now, however, the Vatican stood as the sole guardian of truth, keeping the light of knowledge hidden behind its stone walls. Imagine a time when the world's greatest minds came together in one place, a center of knowledge where ideas flowed freely, and the brightest thinkers of the ancient world gathered to share their discoveries. This place was the Library of Alexandria, located in Egypt, and it was more than just a library. It was a symbol of human achievement, a testament to what could be accomplished when knowledge was shared, preserved, and passed down. The library housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls, many of which were written by the greatest minds in history. These were the works of Aristotle, Euclid, Archimedes, and many others who shaped the course of science, philosophy, and mathematics. Aristotle's writings on logic and ethics, which still influence philosophy today, were carefully preserved in the library's vast collection. Euclid's Elements, which laid the foundation for geometry, was there, studied by scholars eager to build upon his groundbreaking work. These works, along with countless others, were part of a larger treasure trove of knowledge that was collected from across the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a place to store knowledge. It was a living, breathing institution of learning. Scholars from all over the known world came to Alexandria to study, debate, and learn from one another. It was here that they gathered to translate and preserve texts from different cultures, including those of the Babylonians, Egyptians, and Persians. This exchange of ideas led to a flourishing of intellectual activity, where new discoveries and innovations were made every day. But all of this came to an abrupt halt. In one catastrophic event, much of the library and its priceless collection of scrolls were destroyed in a fire. The fire, which occurred at different times over the centuries, is shrouded in mystery. Some say it was a result of warfare, others claim that it was an accident, but the impact was the same. A vast portion of the world's knowledge was lost. What exactly was lost in the flames? The question has haunted historians and scholars for centuries. Many of the scrolls contained the works of ancient thinkers who were never fully understood, whose ideas were only beginning to influence the course of human thought. Some of these works may have held knowledge far beyond the time in which they were written. Were there forgotten scientific discoveries? Mathematical formulas that could have advanced civilization centuries ahead? The burning of the library was not just the destruction of a building, it was the destruction of an entire world of thought. The loss was not only felt in Alexandria, but across the ancient world. Ideas that could have changed the course of history were reduced to ashes. For centuries, the question has lingered. What was truly lost in the fire? While we will never know the full extent of the knowledge that perished, we are left with a sense of longing, a curiosity about what might have been. But even in its destruction, the Library of Alexandria left a legacy that continues to inspire the pursuit of knowledge. The fire that destroyed the Library of Alexandria remains one of the most tragic and mysterious events in human history. It's said that the flames raged so fiercely, they swallowed up thousands of scrolls, many of which contained the most advanced knowledge of the ancient world. But what if the fire wasn't just an accident? What if there was something more to the destruction of the library than a simple spark of fate? The theories surrounding the fire are as numerous as the scrolls it burned. Some say the fire was started during a military conflict, perhaps when Julius Caesar's forces set fire to the city of Alexandria in the 1st century BCE. Caesar's ships were trapped in the harbour by his enemies. and, in an attempt to break free, he ordered the city's docks to be set alight. The fire spread quickly, destroying much of the city, and it's believed that the Library of Alexandria was caught in the flames. But was it truly an accident? Could there have been a hidden agenda behind the destruction of the library? A deliberate act to silence the knowledge contained within its walls? Some historians have suggested that the library's burning was no mere accident, but the result of a calculated effort to control knowledge. The library held not only the works of ancient Greek thinkers, but also the texts of countless other civilizations. The knowledge contained within these scrolls had the potential to disrupt the political and religious order of the time. What if certain powers saw the library as a threat to their control over the masses? Could those in power have deliberately destroyed the library to prevent the spread of ideas that challenged their authority? The idea that the burning of the Library of Alexandria was part of a larger scheme to control knowledge is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Throughout history, those in power have often sought to suppress ideas that could undermine their rule. The destruction of the library could have been an attempt to erase the knowledge that might have empowered the people, giving them the tools to challenge the existing order. Others believe that the library's destruction was not the result of a single fire, but a slow, drawn-out process of neglect and decay. Over the centuries, the library suffered from repeated fires, invasions, and natural disasters. Its scrolls, once carefully preserved and guarded, were left to deteriorate in the face of political upheaval and a lack of resources to maintain the library's vast collection. Perhaps the fire that finally brought the library to its knees was just the final blow in a long series of misfortunes. But no matter how it happened, the result was the same: the destruction of a treasure trove of human knowledge. And with it, the world lost something irreplaceable. What we can say for sure is that the fire that consumed the Library of Alexandria forever changed the course of history. It was not just the loss of scrolls and manuscripts, but the loss of an entire era of intellectual achievement. The library was a symbol of human progress, a place where the brightest minds gathered to push the boundaries of what was known. And in a single moment, it was all gone. The truth is, we will never know exactly what happened that fateful day. Was the fire truly an accident, or was it something more deliberate, more sinister? What we do know is that the Library of Alexandria was a beacon of knowledge that was extinguished too soon, and the world has never quite been the same since. In the aftermath of the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476, Europe was thrown into a period of chaos. Without the centralized power of Rome, the once thriving cities and knowledge centers slowly crumbled. The arts, sciences, and philosophy that had flourished during the height of the Roman Empire seemed to fade away. But there was one institution that remained standing amid this collapse: the Catholic Church. With its rise to prominence, the Vatican began to weave itself into the very fabric of European life, becoming a spiritual and intellectual powerhouse. As kingdoms rose and fell, the Church quietly positioned itself as the protector of the Christian faith. But it wasn't just the spiritual world that the Vatican sought to control. The Church knew that to truly hold power, it needed control over the intellectual life of Europe as well. By the early Middle Ages, the Church had become the only organized institution that remained in the vacuum left by the collapse of Rome. In this new world, where ancient knowledge was slipping into darkness, the Vatican began its careful consolidation of the intellectual treasures that had once been scattered across the Roman world. Monasteries became the new centers of learning, places where ancient scrolls, manuscripts, and texts were preserved. But this knowledge was not meant for everyone. The Vatican understood that to maintain control over the masses, knowledge had to be kept in the hands of the few. Only the clergy had access to the teachings of the ancient philosophers, scientists, and theologians. The secrets of the past were carefully guarded, their dissemination controlled by the Church's hierarchy. The Vatican's influence slowly spread throughout Europe, not only shaping the spiritual lives of the people, but also determining what ideas were allowed to be explored. Any knowledge that did not align with the Church's teachings was deemed heretical and was destroyed, erased from the pages of history. The rise of the Vatican during the Middle Ages marked the beginning of a new epoch, one in which knowledge became a powerful tool of control. It wasn't just about guiding people's faith. It was about guiding their understanding of the world. In a time when most people were illiterate and uneducated, the Vatican's control over knowledge meant that it had the power to shape the very worldview of society. While the rest of Europe struggled to rebuild after the collapse of Rome, the Vatican was quietly building its own empire of knowledge. The Church's libraries and archives began to grow, becoming vast repositories of wisdom. However, this knowledge was kept within the stone walls of monasteries and churches, available only to the educated elite. Ordinary people had little access to the teachings of the ancient world. The Vatican's growing influence wasn't just spiritual, it was intellectual and political as well. The power to control what was known and what was believed was not something the Vatican took lightly. As the Church solidified its position as the ultimate authority in Europe, it ensured that its version of history, science, and philosophy was the only one that mattered. In the centuries to come, this control would only increase. The Vatican's quiet ambitions had begun, and the intellectual and spiritual life of Europe would be shaped by them for centuries. The rise of the Vatican was not just the rise of a religious institution, it was the rise of a new, intellectual order, one that would define the course of European history for the next 1,000 years. When we think of the Vatican and its role in preserving ancient knowledge, we often imagine the Church as a humble guardian of wisdom, carefully preserving texts for future generations. But what if the story is more complicated than that? What if, rather than simply protecting knowledge, the Church took a more active role in controlling what was kept and what was lost? Evidence suggests that the Vatican was not just a passive observer in the preservation of ancient manuscripts. It may have been an active player in the acquisition, and sometimes even the theft of these manuscripts from the ancient centers of learning, including Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria, once the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, was destroyed in a fire. But what if not everything was lost in the flames? Some scholars believe that certain manuscripts, particularly those containing scientific, mathematical, and philosophical works, were secretly removed from the library before it burned. The question is, where did these texts go? Did they simply vanish into history, or were they taken and hidden by those who understood their potential power? There are hints that many of these manuscripts may have found their way into the hands of the Church. As the Roman Empire crumbled, the Church emerged as the dominant intellectual force in Europe. Monasteries, libraries, and scholars under the Church's influence began collecting and copying manuscripts from ancient civilizations. But some of these manuscripts may have been acquired under questionable circumstances. How did these works end up in the Church's possession? Was it simply a matter of preservation? Or did the Church take advantage of the chaos of the times to quietly remove valuable texts from the ancient world? It's important to remember that the Church was not just a spiritual institution. It was also a political one. It had the power to shape history, and controlling knowledge was one way to maintain that power. In the absence of a strong central government following the fall of Rome, the Church was free to consolidate knowledge for itself, deciding what would be preserved and what would be forgotten. This control extended to manuscripts from Alexandria and other centers of learning. It's been suggested that certain texts, especially those that challenged traditional religious beliefs, were quietly removed or hidden, as they could pose a threat to the Church's authority. Works that might contradict the Bible or promote ideas considered heretical were quietly swept under the rug. Some scholars believe that these manuscripts weren't lost to history, but deliberately hidden by those who stood to gain from keeping them out of the public eye. Over time, these hidden manuscripts were carefully guarded by the Church, some remaining in private Vatican archives, inaccessible to anyone outside. The clerical elite. Were these manuscripts truly preserved for the benefit of humanity? Or were they stolen and kept hidden to maintain the Vatican's control over knowledge? In the centuries that followed, the Church became the final authority on what was known and what was not. Its control over ancient knowledge and its role in shaping intellectual life in Europe left a legacy that is still felt today. The question remains, did the Vatican protect knowledge, or did it quietly steal it from the hands of history? What secrets lie within the archives that the world has never seen? The answer may never fully be known, but the story of the hidden manuscripts continues to intrigue those who seek to uncover the truth. In the heart of Vatican City lies one of the most mysterious places on Earth, the Vatican's secret archives. This vast repository of documents and manuscripts has been shrouded in secrecy for centuries, accessible only to a select few. But what exactly is hidden within these walls? And why has the Church kept it so tightly guarded? The Vatican's secret archives is not just a collection of old books and papers. It holds some of the most important documents in history, including correspondence from popes, royal decrees, and even classified documents dating back to the earliest days of the Church. However, what truly catches the attention of historians, archaeologists, and conspiracy theorists alike are the ancient texts believed to have been stored away in the archive. Some of these manuscripts may trace their origins back to the Library of Alexandria. It's possible that many of the scrolls and texts that survived the destruction of the Great Library found their way to the Vatican, where they were carefully hidden from the public eye. For centuries, scholars have speculated that the Vatican's collection contains works that could radically change our understanding of history. Some believe that these texts contain knowledge about the ancient world that was deliberately concealed to maintain the Church's authority. Why would the Vatican keep these manuscripts locked away? Was it simply to protect them? Or was there a deeper, more strategic reason for keeping them out of reach? The Vatican's control over knowledge is well documented, and over time, the Church became not just a spiritual authority, but also a gatekeeper of intellectual and philosophical thought. The The manuscripts stored in the archives are believed to cover a wide range of topics, from science and mathematics to philosophy and theology. Some of these texts may contain ancient discoveries that were too advanced for their time, concepts that could have reshaped the understanding of the natural world or the cosmos. But there is more to the story than just lost scientific knowledge. Some of the hidden manuscripts are thought to contain theological ideas that challenge the very foundation of Christian doctrine. These texts might have questioned the teachings of the Church or revealed alternative versions of biblical stories. Could these manuscripts hold the truth behind suppressed religious teachings, or even offer a glimpse into forgotten philosophies that existed before the rise of Christianity? The secrecy surrounding the Vatican's archives has only fueled these theories. Why are these texts kept locked away from public view? Some believe the Church fears the impact that these ancient manuscripts could have on the faith of millions, while others argue that the Vatican simply wishes to maintain its dominance over religious and intellectual matters. Whatever the reason, the silence of the Vatican only deepens the mystery. The Vatican's secret archives have become an enduring symbol of hidden knowledge, a place where the Church has carefully collected and stored ancient documents for centuries. While the world has moved on, the question remains: what truths are hidden in the vaults of the Vatican, and why has the Church kept them sealed away for so long? The mysteries of the Vatican's secret archives may never be fully revealed, but the allure of the knowledge it holds continues to captivate those who seek to uncover the forgotten past. During the Dark Ages, when the world seemed to have fallen into chaos after the fall of Rome, a small group of individuals quietly took on the enormous task of preserving the knowledge of the ancient world. These individuals were monks, and their monasteries became the only places where intellectual activity could continue in a world that seemed to have forgotten its past. With the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476, Europe was thrown into turmoil. Without the centralized authority of Rome, much of the intellectual infrastructure that had once supported knowledge and education was dismantled. Libraries were destroyed, schools were closed, and much of the world's ancient wisdom was lost in the confusion of war and social upheaval. But in the midst of this darkness, monastic orders became the unexpected guardians of knowledge. The monks lived in isolated communities, often in remote areas, and it was in their monasteries that much of the knowledge from ancient civilizations was preserved. The monks spent their days copying manuscripts, translating ancient texts, and keeping the wisdom of the past alive. In a time when most people were illiterate and had little access to education, these monks were the last line of defense against the total loss of human knowledge. However, their role as keepers of knowledge wasn't without its challenges. The Catholic Church, which was gaining power across Europe, held a tight grip on what was taught and what was preserved. The monks, while dedicated to preserving knowledge, had to do so under the watchful eye of the Church, which often dictated which texts were deemed acceptable and which were not. While many ancient works were copied with great care, there was also pressure to rewrite or alter them to fit religious dogma. Some manuscripts were altered to align with the teachings of the Church, changing certain ideas or omitting others that were seen as controversial or heretical. In this way, the preservation of knowledge wasn't just about maintaining the past. It was about shaping the narrative of history to align with the Church's vision of the world. This control over knowledge didn't stop with the preservation of ancient texts. It extended to the production of new works as well. The monks were often the only ones who could read and write, and as a result, they became the intellectual backbone of the church. They wrote theological works, philosophical treatises, and even scientific studies, all under the church's guidance. The church's power to control what was known and what was taught became even more pronounced as it expanded its influence across Europe. In this world, knowledge was a tool of both faith and power, and the monks, though often unaware of the larger political forces at play, were the keepers of a delicate balance. They were tasked with preserving the knowledge of the past, but they were also shaped by the church's influence, ensuring that only certain ideas and beliefs were passed on. Despite the constraints placed on them, the monks' role in preserving knowledge during the Dark Ages cannot be underestimated. Without their efforts, much of the wisdom of the ancient world would have been lost forever. However, the question remains: how much of the original knowledge survived intact, and how much was altered, rewritten, or erased in order to fit the narrative set by the church? The monks may have been the guardians of knowledge, but they were also caught in a system that sought to control what was remembered and what was forgotten. The story of Alexandria's downfall is a tragic one, filled with political intrigue, religious conflict, and the gradual erosion of a once great city. Alexandria, home to the greatest library of the ancient world, was a thriving center of knowledge, culture, and intellectual life. But in the end, it was not a natural disaster or a foreign invader that brought about the city's ruin. The fall of Alexandria can be traced back to a series of events in which political and religious ambitions played a central role. The first blow to Alexandria came during the reign of Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, Caesar's forces found themselves embroiled in a civil war in Egypt. The city was caught in the middle of this conflict when Caesar's enemies set fire to the harbour, and the flames spread to parts of Alexandria. Some historians believe that the fire destroyed part of the Library of Alexandria, or, at least, many of the texts housed there. But this was just the beginning of a much larger story. After Caesar, the Roman emperors who followed continued to shape Alexandria's fate. Under Emperor Aurelian, in the 3rd century CE, the city faced another devastating blow. Aurelian, seeking to consolidate Roman power and restore order to the empire, ordered the destruction of parts of Alexandria during his military campaign against Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. The city was caught in the chaos of war, and once again parts of its intellectual heart, the library, were lost. But it wasn't just warfare that spelled the end for Alexandria. As the Roman Empire evolved, so did its religious landscape. By the time of Emperor Theodosius in the 4th century, Christianity had become the official religion of the Roman Empire, and pagan philosophies were increasingly viewed with suspicion and hostility. Alexandria, which had long been a center of intellectual inquiry, was also home to a vibrant pagan tradition, and this conflict between the old and new religious orders would play a key role in the city's decline. In 378, a violent clash erupted between Christians and pagans in Alexandria. Led by the bishop Theophilus, a group of Christian zealots destroyed the Serapeum, a temple dedicated to the god Serapis, which housed part of the remaining library's collection. The destruction of the Serapeum was symbolic, marking the end of pagan intellectual traditions in Alexandria and the beginning of Christian dominance in the city. The church's growing power led to the systematic eradication of knowledge that did not align with Christian doctrine, and Alexandria's library, once the beacon of human learning, was all but wiped out. By the end of the 4th century, Alexandria had lost its intellectual soul, its library in ruins, and its scholars scattered. The Roman emperors, through their political and religious ambitions, had played a significant role in the downfall of this great city. What began as a series of military conflicts and political struggles eventually gave way to religious zealotry, and in the end, Alexandria's greatest treasure, the Library of Alexandria, was lost to the pages of history. The question remains: did political and religious ambitions contribute to the destruction of the library? The answer, it seems, is yes. Through a combination of war, religious conflict, and the gradual erosion of intellectual freedom, the library that once held the wisdom of the ancient world was silenced, and Alexandria's light of knowledge was extinguished forever. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire, it faced a powerful opponent, the intellectual traditions of the pagan world. Pagan philosophy, science, and literature had flourished for centuries in Greece, Rome, and beyond. But as the Church began to consolidate power, it made the decision to suppress these ancient ideas that did not align with its beliefs. The early Christian Church did not just aim to convert souls, it also sought to reshape the intellectual landscape of the ancient world. The idea of pagan knowledge was not simply rejected, it was erased. In the eyes of the Church, much of the wisdom of the ancient philosophers was seen as a threat to the new Christian doctrine. Pagan thinkers like Aristotle, Plato, and Euclid had built intellectual systems that were rooted in reason, science, and logic. These systems often contradicted the Church's teachings, especially when it came to the nature of the universe and the role of humanity in it. Pagan ideas about the natural world, the stars, and the gods were incompatible with Christian teachings about creation, sin, and salvation. And so, over time, the Church took action to ensure that pagan knowledge would not challenge its authority. One of the most powerful ways the Church worked to suppress pagan knowledge was through its control of education and intellectual life. In the early centuries of Christianity, the Church became the central authority in Europe, shaping not only spiritual matters, but also education and philosophy. Pagan schools and temples were closed down, and the teachings of ancient philosophers were replaced with Christian doctrine. The Christian Church, particularly after the rise of Emperor Constantine in the 4th century, sought to remove the influence of paganism from all aspects of society. This included not only religion, but also culture, art, and intellectual pursuits. Many ancient texts were destroyed, particularly those that didn't fit within the Church's worldview. The Library of Alexandria, which had once housed the greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world, became a prime target. As Alexandria fell under the control of the Roman emperors and the Church, the library's contents were systematically destroyed or hidden away. The most famous example of this destruction came in the 4th century, when Christian mobs led by Theophilus, the Bishop of Alexandria, destroyed the Serapeum, a temple that housed part of the library's collection. This event marked a symbolic victory for the Church, as it signified the triumph of Christianity over the pagan intellectual traditions of the past. But the destruction of Alexandria was not an isolated incident. It was part of a broader agenda by the Church to erase any knowledge that did not conform to its teachings. Pagan philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists were often condemned as heretics, and their works were either burned or forgotten. The Church's role in the erasure of pagan knowledge has had lasting consequences. For centuries, much of the intellectual heritage of the ancient world was lost or deliberately hidden from view. While the Church continued to preserve some knowledge, it often did so in a way that was filtered through a Christian lens. This process of suppression and alteration not only shaped the intellectual climate of the Middle Ages, but also slowed the progress of science and philosophy. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was, in many ways, the beginning of a long period of intellectual darkness where the wisdom of the ancients was buried beneath the weight of religious dogma. Today, we can only wonder what might have been if this knowledge had not been lost. Would the course of history have been different if the teachings of the ancient philosophers had been allowed to continue and evolve alongside the rise of Christianity? It is a question that remains unanswered, but the erasure of pagan knowledge remains one of the great tragedies in the history of human thought. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria may have been a monumental loss, but what if not all of the knowledge contained within it was lost to the flames? What if some of its most valuable manuscripts survived the destruction, hidden away in secret locations, waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered? Over the centuries, a number of mysterious codices and scrolls have emerged, each carrying with them the tantalizing possibility of ancient knowledge that was thought to be lost forever. These hidden codices have puzzled historians, archaeologists, and scholars who speculate that they may hold information far beyond anything officially recorded in the history books. Some of these texts are believed to have been part of the Library of Alexandria's vast collection, and their survival could rewrite much of what we know about the ancient world. One of the most famous of these hidden scrolls is the Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in Egypt in 1945. The texts, which were found in a sealed jar buried in the Egyptian desert, are thought to contain early Christian writings, some of which challenge the traditional narrative of the Bible. These codices include Gnostic texts that present an entirely different view of Christianity, one that emphasizes knowledge and wisdom over faith and obedience. These texts suggest that the early church may have deliberately suppressed certain teachings, hiding them from the public in order to control the direction of Christianity. But the Nag Hammadi codices are not the only mysterious texts that have surfaced over the years. Another intriguing discovery was made in the 12th century, when a manuscript known as the Codex Gigas appeared in Prague. The Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible, is an enormous manuscript that contains a complete Latin Bible, along with other writings, including medical and historical texts. The manuscript is famous not only for its size and complexity, but also for a large illustration of the devil, leading to its eerie nickname. Some believe that the Codex Gigas could have been influenced by ancient texts that predate Christianity, possibly even containing knowledge from the time of the Roman Empire. The fact that the Codex Gigas survives to this day, despite its mysterious origins, adds to the intrigue surrounding ancient manuscripts that have been hidden from the public eye. There are also theories that suggest other hidden scrolls, possibly from the Library of Alexandria, have been preserved in secret archives, either by the Church or by other powerful organizations. These texts are believed to contain knowledge that was considered too dangerous or controversial to be shared with the general public. Some speculate that these manuscripts could reveal forgotten scientific discoveries, philosophies, or even mystical practices that were too radical for their time. The very existence of these hidden codices raises an important question. Why were these texts hidden in the first place? Were they deliberately suppressed to maintain control over knowledge? Or were they simply lost over time, hidden by the sands of history? Whatever the reason, these ancient texts continue to fuel the imagination of those who seek to uncover the secrets of the past. As new discoveries are made and lost scrolls are found, we are reminded of the vast reservoir of knowledge that may still lie beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The lost scrolls of the Library of Alexandria may have been lost to history, but the secrets they hold could one day be revealed, reshaping our understanding of the ancient world forever. There's a theory that sounds so unbelievable, it almost seems like a science fiction plot. The idea that history, as we know it, might have been manipulated. It's called the phantom time hypothesis, and it suggests that parts of our timeline were altered, erased, or even invented entirely, all to serve a specific agenda. This theory has sparked heated debates among historians, and it raises questions that challenge the very foundation of how we view history. What if events we think we know well, like the fall of Alexandria and the loss of its knowledge, were not accurately recorded, or worse, deliberately obscured? The phantom time hypothesis was popularized by the historian Heribert Illig in the late 20th century, and it suggests that about 300 years of history, specifically between 600 and 900 CE, might have never happened. According to Illig, this period was artificially inserted into the historical timeline by the Church, using the Gregorian calendar to fabricate dates and events. Essentially, the argument is that our history is off by a few centuries, and the real timeline is much shorter than we've been led to believe. So, what could have caused such a massive manipulation of history? One of the key reasons behind this hypothesis is the idea that the Church had a lot to gain from controlling history and time. By altering the timeline, the Church could create a sense of continuity, where its authority seemed to have always been present and unbroken. In this manipulated timeline, the Church could also bury certain events, like the destruction of Alexandria and the loss of its knowledge, making it harder for future generations to question the true origins of their intellectual and spiritual traditions. The theory goes that after the fall of Rome, when the Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476, Europe entered a dark period. The knowledge and achievements of the ancient world, particularly those housed in the Library of Alexandria, seemed to vanish. But the destruction of the library and the subsequent loss of knowledge was not something that happened overnight. It was gradual, and the timeline we have today may have been intentionally adjusted to hide that gradual erasure of knowledge. Could the Church have played a role in this? Could it have been part of a larger strategy to consolidate its power and suppress the intellectual advancements of the past? Some argue that by stretching the timeline, the Church could diminish the impact of the classical world's intellectual legacy, thereby strengthening its grip on knowledge. By controlling the history, the Church could make its influence seem eternal, as if it had always been the central authority in Europe. The idea of manipulating time is deeply unsettling, because it calls into question everything we believe about history. If parts of our timeline were fabricated, what else have we been misled about? What if the fall of Alexandria, the greatest intellectual center of the ancient world, wasn't just a result of political and military conflict, but also part of a broader agenda to suppress knowledge. The phantom time hypothesis challenges us to think critically about how history is recorded and who controls it. If events were erased or altered, who decided what to keep and what to erase? And more importantly, why? The theory remains controversial and, to many, highly speculative. But it opens the door to a deeper exploration of the relationship between power, knowledge, and history. What if the timeline we've been taught is not the full story? The phantom time hypothesis forces us to ask the uncomfortable question: how much of history is truly ours to know, and how much of it has been carefully curated for us by those in power? For centuries, the Vatican has stood as the central force of Christianity, guiding both spiritual and political matters across Europe. But what many don't realize is that the Church's influence didn't stop with matters of faith. It extended deeply into the world of knowledge itself. Ancient ideas about astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy that once shaped the minds of great thinkers were slowly absorbed into the Church's control, turning ancient knowledge into a tool for power. The Church understood early on that knowledge was power. In a time when very few people could read or write, those who controlled the written word held the keys to shaping society. But the Church wasn't just interested in preserving ancient texts. It became the gatekeeper of what could and couldn't be known. The vast libraries of the Vatican, filled with manuscripts from ancient Greece, Rome, and beyond, were carefully curated and selectively shared. In this way, the Vatican didn't just guard knowledge, it shaped it. During the early medieval period, the Church became the intellectual authority in Europe, preserving, translating, and adapting the works of ancient philosophers and scientists to fit its own narrative. But the knowledge that wasn't seen as compatible with Christian teachings was often suppressed or outright erased. Ancient Greek and Roman philosophies that focused on logic, reason, and the natural world were accepted if they didn't challenge the authority of the Church. However, ideas that conflicted with Christian doctrine, especially when they threatened to challenge the Church's control over spiritual and political life, were hidden away or destroyed. The influence of astronomy, for example, was twisted to fit the religious agenda of the Church. The Church adopted the Ptolemaic model of the universe, which placed the Earth at the center of the universe, a view that aligned with Christian teachings that humanity was the center of God's creation. This model became the accepted truth for centuries, despite the fact that astronomers like Copernicus and Galileo had begun to challenge this view. When Galileo dared to publicly support the Copernican heliocentric model in the 16th century, he was tried by the Inquisition and forced to recant. His punishment wasn't because his findings were wrong. It was because they threatened the Church's authority. In mathematics, the works of great minds like Euclid and Pythagoras were preserved, but their influence was limited by the Church's desire to keep knowledge aligned with religious doctrine. The Church used mathematical knowledge not only for religious purposes, such as in the construction of cathedrals and the development of the liturgical calendar, but also to demonstrate its divine order. In philosophy, the Church integrated some aspects of ancient thought, but only the ideas that were compatible with its theological beliefs. Thinkers like Aristotle were admired, but their more secular ideas about the nature of the universe were often downplayed or rejected. The Church presented itself as the ultimate authority on truth, dictating what was acceptable knowledge and what was not. Through its control of education and intellectual life, it consolidated its power, ensuring that its version of history and science was the only one that could be taught. The Vatican became not just the spiritual leader of Europe, but also its intellectual leader, with the power to decide which ideas were allowed to flourish and which were forbidden. By keeping control over ancient knowledge and adapting it to fit its own agenda, the Church shaped the intellectual and spiritual development of Europe for centuries. While many of the great ideas of the ancient world survived, they were filtered through the lens of the Church, transforming knowledge into a tool of control. The Church didn't just preserve knowledge, it wielded it, shaping the course of history in ways that are still felt today. When we think of the Crusades, we often focus on the military conquests, the religious fervour, and the battles fought between Christians and Muslims. But there was another, less discussed side to these campaigns, the hunt for knowledge. The Vatican, in its quest for power, was not just interested in the land it could conquer. It was also searching for the wisdom of the ancient world, knowledge that over time had been lost or hidden away. And what better place to look than the ancient libraries and centres of learning that had once thrived in the Middle East? During the Crusades, especially the First Crusade, which began in 1096, the Catholic Church sent armies to reclaim the Holy Land, but its influence stretched beyond just religious goals. Many of the Crusaders found themselves exposed to ancient texts and manuscripts in places like Antioch and Jerusalem. The Church, already familiar with the works of Aristotle, Euclid, and other philosophers, began to see the importance of retrieving manuscripts that could bolster its own power and understanding of the world. It is widely believed that during these campaigns, the Vatican took steps to recover lost texts from places like Alexandria, where much of the ancient world's knowledge had once been stored. Alexandria, a city long known as the intellectual centre of the ancient world, had been home to the greatest library in history. The library housed countless scrolls and manuscripts on topics ranging from astronomy to mathematics, philosophy to medicine. These texts, some thought to have survived the library's destruction, were believed to contain knowledge that could help shape the future of Christianity and secure the Vatican's power. The Church's interest in these manuscripts grew during the Crusades as Crusaders came into contact with ancient Islamic libraries, where many Greek and Roman works had been preserved and expanded upon. It's likely that some of these manuscripts, which were long lost to the West, found their way into the hands of the Church. The Vatican's interest in recovering ancient texts wasn't only about preserving knowledge for its own sake, it was about controlling that knowledge. In an era when the Church was striving to maintain its authority over both the spiritual and intellectual realms, any knowledge that threatened its power had to be carefully managed. If these ancient texts contained ideas that could challenge church doctrine or undermine its authority, they were either hidden away or altered to fit within the boundaries of acceptable Christian thought. Some scholars argue that during the Crusades, the Vatican actively sought out these manuscripts, especially those that might help consolidate its intellectual dominance. These texts, many of which had been preserved by Islamic scholars, were often translated into Latin by Christian monks who worked under the Church's authority. But the Vatican wasn't just interested in the texts themselves, it was also interested in what they represented. Ancient knowledge, in the hands of the right people, could be a powerful tool for shaping the future of Europe. The Church, already in a position of immense power, knew that controlling knowledge was essential for maintaining that power. The Crusades, in their search for holy relics and sacred land, may have also been a quest for something less tangible, but equally valuable: the intellectual treasures of the ancient world. Did the Vatican seek to reclaim lost texts from Alexandria during these military campaigns? It's likely that the answer is yes. The Church's reach during the Crusades went beyond the battlefield and into the libraries and archives of the ancient world. Knowledge, it seems, was just as much a prize in these wars as the land itself. During the medieval period, there were those who secretly pursued knowledge that had long been forbidden by the Church. These individuals were known as alchemists, and their quest was far more than the pursuit of turning base metals into gold. They sought hidden truths, knowledge that had been passed down from the ancient world, possibly from the great library of Alexandria itself. Alchemy, often seen as a mystical and secretive practice, was rooted in a deep desire to understand the nature of the universe, to uncover hidden forces that governed life and matter. In a time when the Church held immense power over intellectual thought, alchemists were often seen as heretics, their work considered dangerous and subversive. The Church's control over knowledge meant that anything that could challenge its teachings or undermine its authority was deemed forbidden. Ancient texts, many of which contained radical ideas about the natural world, were suppressed or destroyed, their wisdom locked away from the public eye. But some alchemists had access to these lost manuscripts, which were possibly handed down from the great thinkers of Alexandria, or preserved by scholars in the Islamic world. These alchemists, working in secret, became the protectors of forbidden knowledge, guarding the ancient wisdom that the Church had sought to erase. The quest for knowledge during this time was not just about uncovering scientific truths, but about rediscovering the mysteries that had been hidden by centuries of religious control. The alchemists' work was often symbolic, their writings filled with complex metaphors designed to protect their secrets from the prying eyes of the Church. They believed that by uncovering the secrets of nature, they could unlock the deeper truths about God's creation. But their work was dangerous. The Church saw alchemy not just as a challenge to religious doctrine, but as a direct threat to its power. In the eyes of the Vatican, alchemists were dabbling in forbidden practices, and their pursuit of knowledge often led them down paths considered to be heretical. The alchemist's search for the philosopher's stone, an object believed to grant immortality and turn any metal into gold, was perhaps the most famous of their pursuits. But it was not the gold they sought. It was the deeper understanding of the universe, the uncovering of hidden truths that had been lost. They were, in many ways, trying to reconnect with the wisdom of the ancients, knowledge that had been buried by the Church's control over history. Throughout history, many alchemists were persecuted for their beliefs, branded as heretics, and sometimes even executed. But despite the dangers, their secretive work continued, often passed down through generations of scholars and practitioners. Some of their manuscripts, filled with coded language and alchemical symbols, survived, and the knowledge contained within them would later influence the development of modern science, especially in the fields of chemistry and medicine. The alchemists of the medieval period were not just mystical figures in search of mythical objects. They were the keepers of knowledge, the protectors of truths that the Church sought to suppress. Their pursuit of forbidden knowledge is a testament to the resilience of human curiosity, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. The alchemists may not have fully succeeded in their quest to unlock the secrets of the universe, but they played a crucial role in preserving the knowledge that would one day lead to the scientific revolutions that shaped the modern world. They were the quiet rebels, working in the shadows, keeping the flame of knowledge alive during one of the darkest periods in history. The Renaissance, which began in the 14th century, is often seen as the period in which Europe rediscovered the wisdom of the ancient world. From the great philosophers of Greece to the scientists of Rome, the ancient texts that had been lost or suppressed during the Dark Ages seemed to spring back to life, sparking a revolution in art, science, and thought. But was this knowledge truly rediscovered? Or had it been quietly preserved and released by the Vatican at a time when it suited the Church's interests? The Renaissance is widely celebrated as a time of intellectual and artistic rebirth, where figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Galileo challenged the established worldview and pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. New ideas about the natural world, the cosmos, and human existence began to emerge, many of them directly challenging the doctrines of the Church. But as this new age of knowledge unfolded, it's worth considering where this information came from. While many historians attribute the intellectual resurgence to the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman texts, the timing of this revival is highly significant. It occurred when the Church was beginning to lose some of its power and influence over European society, particularly in the wake of the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. Some scholars argue that the Vatican, having carefully controlled knowledge for centuries, might have seen the Renaissance as an opportunity to strategically release ancient texts and ideas that could be integrated into the Church's narrative. In this sense, the rediscovery of ancient knowledge could have been less about finding lost texts, and more about releasing knowledge that had been carefully preserved in the Vatican's secret archives. The Church had long held control over intellectual life in Europe. It was the Vatican that decided which texts were preserved and which were discarded. It was the Church that controlled education, from the schools in monasteries to the universities across Europe. The Church had the power to shape not only spiritual beliefs, but also intellectual thought. Ancient manuscripts, particularly those that might challenge Christian teachings, were often hidden away or suppressed. It was only when the Vatican felt secure enough in its authority, and when political circumstances shifted, that it became more open to allowing these ideas to resurface. The timing of the Renaissance suggests that some of the rediscovered knowledge might have been released as a calculated move by the Church to maintain control over the intellectual developments of the time. The rise of humanism, which emphasized the study of classical texts and the value of human reason, was a challenge to the Church's focus on theology and divine authority. In this context, the Vatican's role in releasing ancient knowledge could be seen as a way to absorb these new ideas into its own framework, ensuring that the Church remained at the center of European intellectual life. The Church didn't necessarily want to lose control over knowledge. It wanted to shape it. By releasing certain texts and ideas during the Renaissance, the Vatican could keep the intellectual revolution under its watchful eye, directing the course of thought while still allowing for the growth of new ideas. The rediscovery of ancient knowledge, then, may not have been a simple return to the past. It was a carefully orchestrated process, one that ensured the Church remained the ultimate authority in a rapidly changing world. The Renaissance might have been a time of intellectual flourishing, but it was also a time when the Vatican played a critical role in controlling the flow of knowledge, ensuring that the past was shaped to serve the Church's ongoing influence. In the 16th century, as Europe was still reeling from the chaos of the Reformation and the rise of Protestantism, the Vatican sought a new way to solidify its power and control over both spiritual and intellectual matters. Enter the Jesuits, formerly known as the Society of Jesus. Founded in 1534 by Ignatius of Loyola, the Jesuit order was not just a religious group. It became the Vatican's intellectual army, tasked with spreading Catholic doctrine, protecting the Church's interests, and controlling knowledge. The Jesuits quickly established themselves as a force to be reckoned with, not just in matters of faith, but also in the realm of education and scholarship. They set up schools and universities across Europe, spreading their influence far beyond the religious sphere. These institutions became the center of intellectual life in Catholic Europe, and the Jesuits were at the forefront of the transmission of knowledge. However, their role went far beyond simply educating the faithful. The Jesuits were also deeply involved in collecting, organizing, and controlling knowledge, both religious and secular. They understood that knowledge was power, and they worked tirelessly to ensure that this power was used to strengthen the Church's authority. They were involved in the production of textbooks, scholarly works, and translations, often rewriting history to ensure that it aligned with Catholic teachings. In many ways, the Jesuits became the gatekeepers of knowledge in the Catholic world. Their control over education meant that they had the power to shape the next generation's understanding of history, science, and philosophy. If any ideas or historical truths conflicted with Catholic doctrine, the Jesuits would step in to censor, rewrite, or suppress them. This control extended to the preservation of ancient texts. The Jesuits were tasked with guarding the Church's intellectual treasures, many of which had been carefully hidden away for centuries. They were responsible for safeguarding the works of ancient philosophers, scientists, and theologians, selectively releasing them when it suited the Church's agenda. Some historians believe that the Jesuits had access to texts that were suppressed by the Church, possibly including manuscripts from the Library of Alexandria, and that they either kept these texts hidden or manipulated them to fit the Church's narrative. But the Jesuits' role was not limited to just controlling what people were allowed to learn. They also played a critical role in shaping what people were not taught. They were involved in the systematic censorship of books, particularly those that were deemed dangerous or heretical. The Jesuits used their influence to ensure that only the correct version of history was taught, erasing any inconvenient truths that might threaten the Church's authority. Their work in this regard extended to the world of exploration as well. During the Age of Exploration, the Jesuits were among the first to travel to distant lands, and they played a central role in translating and interpreting the cultures and languages of the New World. In many cases, the Jesuits were the first Europeans to document the customs, religions, and intellectual traditions of indigenous peoples. But again, their work was not simply about preserving knowledge, it was about controlling it. They would often rewrite or reinterpret indigenous beliefs and practices to align them with Catholic teachings, ensuring that the Catholic Church maintained its power even in the newly discovered territories. The Jesuits' influence in shaping knowledge was vast, and their legacy can still be felt today in the educational institutions they founded and the intellectual traditions they helped to shape. But their role in controlling and censoring historical truths raises important questions. How much of what we know about history, science, and philosophy has been filtered through the lens of the Catholic Church? How many truths have been hidden or distorted to protect the Church's authority? The Jesuits were more than just a religious order. They were the Church's intellectual enforcers, shaping the flow of knowledge for centuries. During the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, there were those who were determined to protect the knowledge that the Church sought to suppress. One of the most intriguing of these groups was the Rosicrucians, a secret society that emerged in the early 17th century. The Rosicrucians were shrouded in mystery, their origins unclear, but their mission was clear: to preserve ancient knowledge and to unlock the hidden wisdom of the past. But what knowledge were they protecting? Many believe that the Rosicrucians were the keepers of ancient secrets that had been passed down through generations, long after the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. The Rosicrucians were not just scholars, but a spiritual brotherhood that combined elements of alchemy, astrology, and mysticism. Their teachings were based on the idea that hidden knowledge about the natural world, the cosmos, and the divine had been suppressed by the powers of the Church and political rulers for centuries. They believed that by rediscovering and preserving this knowledge, they could help usher in a new era of enlightenment. The Rosicrucian manifestos, which were published in the early 1600s, described the society's aims and vision for a world where knowledge would be free from the control of corrupt institutions. These manifestos hinted at a deeper knowledge, one that connected science and spirituality in ways that were far ahead of their time. The society's symbols and teachings were filled with references to ancient knowledge, often pointing to a long-forgotten wisdom that had survived through secret channels. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Rosicrucians is their connection to the lost wisdom of Alexandria. Some believe that the Rosicrucians had access to ancient texts that had been preserved in secret, hidden away from the Vatican's control. These texts, some think, could have been directly linked to the works housed in the Library of Alexandria, which had once been the center of learning in the ancient world. After the destruction of the library, much of the knowledge contained within it was thought to have been lost, but the Rosicrucians may have been part of a hidden network that preserved and passed down these ideas. The Church's control over intellectual life meant that any knowledge that threatened its authority had to be hidden. The Rosicrucians, with their secretive nature and their focus on esoteric knowledge, became the protectors of this wisdom, keeping it safe from the prying eyes of the Vatican. They operated in the shadows, gathering ancient manuscripts and passing down knowledge that could not be openly shared. While the Church was busy controlling what people knew, the Rosicrucians worked behind the scenes, preserving the ancient texts that might otherwise have been lost forever. Some believe that the Rosicrucians held the key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe, and that their secret teachings contained the very wisdom that could challenge the Church's monopoly on knowledge. Whether or not they had direct access to the lost works of Alexandria is still a matter of speculation. But there is no doubt that the Rosicrucians played a crucial role in preserving and protecting knowledge that might otherwise have been erased from history. Their secrecy and their commitment to preserving ancient wisdom left a lasting impact on the intellectual and spiritual movements that followed. The Rosicrucians were more than just a secret society. They were the keepers of a flame that burned quietly in the background, safeguarding the knowledge of the past while the world around them moved forward in ignorance. The discovery of ancient manuscripts and scrolls in the 19th and 20th centuries has shed new light on the lost knowledge of the ancient world. For centuries, historians and scholars believed that much of the wisdom contained in the Library of Alexandria was lost to time and fire. But the unearthing of these ancient texts in places like Egypt, the Middle East, and even Europe has raised questions about what was really lost in Alexandria, and whether some of it had been hidden away, waiting to be found. The Library of Alexandria was once the greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. Scholars from across the Mediterranean flocked to Alexandria to study its vast collection of texts on science, philosophy, and history. It is said that the library housed hundreds of thousands of scrolls and manuscripts, many of which were written by the greatest minds of the ancient world, like Aristotle, Euclid, and Archimedes. But the library's destruction, whether it was a result of the fire set by Julius Caesar in 48 BCE, or the later Christian mob attacks in the 4th century, led to the belief that the majority of its contents were lost forever. Yet, as the years passed, new discoveries began to emerge. In the 19th and 20th centuries, several ancient manuscripts and scrolls were found that seemed to contain knowledge from the very same intellectual traditions that once flourished in Alexandria. One of the most famous discoveries came in the early 1900s, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in caves near the Dead Sea in modern-day Israel. These ancient texts, which included Hebrew scriptures and Jewish writings, provided an unprecedented glimpse into the world of the early Jewish people and the spiritual environment that surrounded the development of Christianity. While not directly linked to the Library of Alexandria, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls suggested that much more of the ancient world's knowledge was still hidden away, preserved by those who sought to protect it from destruction. Another major discovery occurred in Egypt in the late 19th century, when the first papyri were uncovered at the ancient site of Oxyrhynchus. These texts, many of which were written in Greek, included works by early Christian and pagan philosophers, playwrights, and historians. Some of the manuscripts found at Oxyrhynchus even seem to reference ancient works from Alexandria, giving historians a glimpse into the library's vast intellectual world. The discovery of these texts raised a significant question. Were these works truly lost, or had they been deliberately hidden away over the centuries? Some scholars believe that the Vatican, in its quest to control knowledge, may have played a role in suppressing certain works that challenged its teachings. These hidden manuscripts could have been part of a broader effort to control the narrative of history and ensure that only certain ideas, those that aligned with Christian doctrine, were allowed to survive. The unearthing of these ancient texts also revealed the depth of intellectual achievement in the ancient world. In some ways, these discoveries suggested that Alexandria's library wasn't just a storehouse of ancient scrolls, it was a center of knowledge that connected the wisdom of the past with the scientific and philosophical advancements of the future. While many of the texts discovered were incomplete or fragmented, they still offered invaluable insights into the minds of the greatest thinkers of the ancient world. Some scholars began to wonder if these works had been preserved in secret by groups like the Rosicrucians or alchemists, who were known for their desire to protect forbidden knowledge from the influence of the Church. The discoveries of the 19th and 20th centuries forced historians to reconsider what had truly been lost during the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. While much of its collection may have been destroyed, it seems that some of its knowledge survived, whether hidden in plain sight or carefully preserved in secret locations. These discoveries continue to reshape our understanding of the ancient world and challenge the narrative that the destruction of Alexandria marked the end of knowledge. Instead, it appears that some of its wisdom was simply waiting to be uncovered. As new texts continue to be discovered, the true nature of Alexandria's library and its lost works may yet be revealed, offering us a more complete picture of the intellectual legacy of the ancient world. In the early 17th century, one man stood at the center of a storm that would shape the future of science forever. Galileo Galilei, an Italian astronomer, physicist, and mathematician, made groundbreaking discoveries that challenged the very fabric of the world's understanding of the universe. His work, particularly his support of the heliocentric model of the solar system, brought him into direct conflict with the Vatican and the powerful religious authority that controlled intellectual life across Europe. Galileo's story is often seen as a symbol of the clash between science and religion, a battle where the Church fought to maintain control over knowledge, while Galileo sought to push humanity's understanding of the natural world beyond the limitations imposed by religious doctrine. The heliocentric theory, proposed by Copernicus in 1543, argued that the Earth was not the center of the universe, but instead it revolved around the Sun. This idea was revolutionary, and it directly contradicted the geocentric model, which the Catholic Church upheld as gospel truth. The Church had long taught that the Earth was the center of God's creation, and this belief was deeply tied to its authority over both the spiritual and intellectual life of Europe. When Galileo turned his telescope to the heavens in 1610, he saw something that would change history. He discovered moons orbiting Jupiter, mountains on the Moon, and the phases of Venus, observations that clearly supported the heliocentric model. Galileo's findings were irrefutable, and yet the Vatican couldn't accept them. The idea that the Earth was not the center of the universe was a direct challenge to the Church's teachings, and it threatened to unravel the foundation of its power. In 1622, Galileo published his book Sidereus Nuncius, or Starry Messenger, in which he detailed his discoveries. This book caused a stir in the scientific community and beyond, but the Church was not pleased. Galileo's support of Copernican theory was seen as heretical. The Church believed that it was their divine duty to protect the faithful from what it deemed dangerous ideas. In 1627, Galileo was ordered to cease teaching the heliocentric theory, but he didn't back down. Instead, he continued his research and advocacy for the new model of the universe, publishing his most famous work, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, in 1632. This book presented the arguments for both the heliocentric and geocentric models of the universe. Galileo's scientific reasoning was clear and compelling, but the Church saw it as a direct assault on its authority. In 1633, Galileo was summoned to Rome for trial by the Roman Catholic Inquisition. The charges against him were heresy, because his work contradicted the teachings of the Church. Galileo was forced to recant his views, publicly renouncing the heliocentric model and agreeing to live under house arrest for the remainder of his life. Despite the pressure from the Vatican, Galileo's work did not die with his recantation. His ideas sparked a revolution in the world of science. The suppression of his findings by the Church was part of a larger pattern of the Vatican's control over intellectual life. Throughout history, the Church had worked to suppress scientific discoveries that contradicted its teachings. Galileo's trial is often seen as one of the most famous examples of the Church's battle against scientific truth. The Vatican fought to protect its control over the narrative of history and the natural world, trying to maintain its authority by stifling new ideas that could challenge its position. Galileo's courage in the face of this opposition helped to lay the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would follow. Despite the Vatican's efforts to suppress his work, the heliocentric model became the foundation for modern astronomy and physics. Galileo, often called the father of modern science, changed the way humanity understood its place in the universe. His story is a reminder of how powerful institutions have historically used knowledge and the control of ideas to maintain power. In the end, Galileo triumphed not just for science, but for the freedom of thought that would eventually break free from the constraints of religious dogma. The Vatican may have fought to suppress the truth, but Galileo's discoveries ultimately changed the course of history. The story of the lost Library of Alexandria is one filled with mystery, tragedy, and, in some versions, intrigue that still echoes through history today. The library, once the greatest center of knowledge in the ancient world, was destroyed, and with it, the vast collection of scrolls and manuscripts that held the wisdom of thousands of years. For centuries, scholars have wondered if any of the library's knowledge survived. But what if the library's location, its secrets, and perhaps some of its lost texts were still hidden, waiting to be discovered? According to a lesser-known story, a mysterious map could hold the key to finding the lost Library of Alexandria. This map, often referred to as the secret map, is believed to show the precise location where the library once stood, along with hidden coordinates that may point to the site of its final resting place. While many have dismissed it as a mere legend or a hoax, others claim that it is the key to uncovering one of the greatest lost treasures of history. The story of the map begins in the early 20th century, when a strange document surfaced in various secret archives. The map was reportedly discovered by an unknown scholar who came across it while researching ancient texts. According to some versions of the story, the map was drawn by an anonymous cartographer during the Renaissance, a time when Europe was eager to rediscover the lost knowledge of the ancient world. The map was said to contain strange symbols and cryptic coordinates, which, when interpreted correctly, pointed to the area where the Library of Alexandria once stood. But why has this map remained hidden for so long, and why haven't its secrets been revealed? The Vatican, with its long history of controlling knowledge and preserving texts that challenged its authority, has often been associated with such mysteries. It's possible that the Church, having learned of the map's existence, chose to suppress it in order to maintain control over the flow of knowledge. After all, the Vatican has a well-documented history of hiding or controlling ancient texts that could threaten its narrative. If the Library of Alexandria's lost knowledge was ever rediscovered, it could have posed a significant threat to the Vatican's control over intellectual life. Could the Vatican have known about the secret map all along. Some conspiracy theorists believe that the Church may have even played a role in either discovering the map or hiding it to prevent the rediscovery of the library. In the context of the Renaissance, a period when the Church was both a spiritual and intellectual force, the Vatican may have seen the map as a potential threat to its influence, so it chose to keep it out of public reach. While the exact fate of the map remains uncertain, the idea that a hidden treasure of ancient knowledge could still be waiting to be uncovered has captivated the imaginations of many. What might be buried under the sands of Egypt or hidden in ancient ruins? Could the map lead to more than just the location of the library? Some believe that if the Library of Alexandria's lost knowledge were ever found, it could include manuscripts that would change the way we understand history, science, and even religion. The idea of ancient knowledge being hidden in plain sight, guarded by secret societies or powerful institutions like the Vatican, has fueled a long-standing belief that history, as we know it, might not be the whole truth. The secret map, if it truly exists, could be the key to rewriting that history. Perhaps one day the map will be found, or perhaps it will remain hidden, just as the knowledge of Alexandria was for so many centuries. What secrets it holds, and whether they are ever revealed, is a mystery that continues to intrigue historians, archaeologists, and conspiracy theorists alike. Until then, the lost coordinates of Alexandria's library may remain one of history's greatest unsolved riddles. For centuries, the idea that the Vatican has secretly hoarded the lost knowledge of the ancient world has been the subject of speculation, intrigue, and even conspiracy theories. The Library of Alexandria, once the greatest center of learning in the ancient world, was destroyed in the 4th century, and with it countless scrolls and manuscripts containing the knowledge of the past. Some believe that the Vatican, with its immense power over intellectual life in Europe, seized many of these ancient texts and hid them away to protect its own narrative. But how much truth is there to these claims? Did the Vatican really steal and hoard the lost knowledge of Alexandria? Or is this just a myth fueled by suspicion and speculation? To understand the full story, we must first look at the Vatican's historical role as the keeper of knowledge. Since the fall of the Roman Empire, the Vatican has been at the center of intellectual and spiritual life in Europe. It controlled education, scholarship, and the dissemination of knowledge through its vast network of monasteries, schools, and libraries. The Vatican also wielded immense power over what was considered acceptable knowledge, suppressing ideas and texts that conflicted with its teachings. According to some historians, this power extended to the preservation of ancient manuscripts, many of which were believed to have been lost in the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. The theory goes that, as the Church took control of intellectual life in the medieval period, it seized any manuscripts from the ancient world that it could find and hid them away to prevent them from challenging Christian doctrine. But is there any evidence to support these claims? Some archaeologists and scholars argue that the Vatican did indeed play a role in preserving ancient knowledge, but not in the way conspiracy theorists suggest. In fact, the Vatican's extensive libraries, including the Vatican secret archives, have been home to countless manuscripts from throughout history, some of which have been carefully preserved and studied. However, while the Vatican certainly safeguarded some texts, historians disagree on whether it had the power or the interest to suppress entire collections of knowledge. The truth, some argue, is far more complex. Many of the texts that were lost in Alexandria were destroyed in a series of tragic events, including wars, fires, and religious upheavals. It is likely that much of the knowledge contained in those ancient scrolls was scattered, lost, or destroyed long before the Vatican ever had the opportunity to control it. Still, the idea that the Vatican kept certain ancient texts hidden for its own benefit cannot be easily dismissed. Some scholars point to the fact that many of the ancient Greek and Roman texts we know today were preserved by Christian monks during the medieval period. These monks copied manuscripts by hand, sometimes translating them into Latin or other languages, which helped ensure their survival. However, the Church also took great care to control which texts were copied and which were discarded. Some works that were considered heretical or incompatible with Christian doctrine were left out, while others were altered to fit the Church's teachings. This selective preservation and censorship, according to some historians, may have allowed the Vatican to quietly control the flow of knowledge in Europe for centuries. Interviews with historians reveal that the truth behind the Vatican's relationship with ancient knowledge is layered and complex. While there are undoubtedly many myths surrounding the idea of stolen knowledge, the Vatican's influence over intellectual life in Europe cannot be denied. Did the Church secretly hoard the knowledge of Alexandria? Or did it simply act as a guardian of what remained? The answer, it seems, lies somewhere in between. The Vatican may not have directly stolen the library's contents, but it certainly played a role in shaping the intellectual legacy of the ancient world, sometimes suppressing knowledge that didn't align with its own vision. Whether the Vatican actively sought to hide Alexandria's secrets or simply became the custodian of what was left behind, its involvement in preserving and controlling knowledge is undeniable. What remains uncertain is whether the lost works of Alexandria, or the knowledge they contained, will ever be fully recovered. Deep within the walls of Vatican City lies a treasure trove of knowledge, much of it locked away in sections of the Vatican Library that few have ever seen. The Vatican Library is one of the oldest and most extensive collections of manuscripts in the world, and its archives contain millions of texts, many of which are centuries old. But there are areas within the library that remain off-limits to all but a select few, spaces that are shrouded in mystery and secrecy. These hidden sections of the Vatican Library are rumoured to contain some of the most valuable and forbidden knowledge in existence. Some believe that these archives hold ancient manuscripts that were lost when the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, texts that were never meant to be seen by the public eye. These books and scrolls, many of them written by the greatest minds of antiquity, could still hold the secrets of the ancient world. But why are they hidden? Why are certain sections of the Vatican Library closed to the public, and what might they be hiding? The Vatican has long had a reputation for controlling knowledge, carefully curating what the public is allowed to see. For centuries, the Church has maintained its power not just through religious authority, but through its monopoly on education and intellectual life. The Vatican Library, as the custodian of so many ancient texts, has played a crucial role in preserving the Church's narrative. But some critics have argued that the Church has also used the library to protect knowledge that could challenge its teachings. Could the Vatican be hiding the true history of the Library of Alexandria, or perhaps the knowledge that was lost in its destruction? The theory that ancient texts from Alexandria might still be stored within the Vatican Library is not new. Some historians suggest that after the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, some manuscripts may have been smuggled out and secretly hidden away by scholars who understood the value of preserving ancient knowledge. The Vatican, with its vast network of religious institutions, would have been the ideal place to keep such texts safe from the dangers of fire, war, and political upheaval. According to some theories, the Vatican Library's hidden sections may contain these very texts, scrolls, and manuscripts from Alexandria that have remained unseen for centuries. While no conclusive evidence has emerged to support this theory, the mystery surrounding the Vatican Library continues to intrigue scholars, archaeologists, and conspiracy theorists alike. There are reports of scholars who have been granted access to the library's secret archives, but these accounts are often vague, and access is heavily restricted. The Vatican has never openly revealed what lies behind the locked doors of its most private sections, and this only adds to the intrigue. What is contained in these hidden areas? Could the knowledge of the ancients still be preserved there, waiting to be discovered? Some believe that the Vatican's control over these texts is a way to protect the Church's power, ensuring that no knowledge is released to the public unless it fits the narrative that the Vatican wants to maintain. Others argue that the Vatican is simply protecting these ancient manuscripts, preserving them for future generations. But the question remains, why keep these texts hidden? What truths might they reveal about the ancient world, and what could they tell us about the history of humanity that has been deliberately concealed? The answer may lie within the vaults of the Vatican Library, but only time will tell if the secrets of the lost knowledge of Alexandria will ever be revealed. For now, these texts remain locked away, their contents a mystery, waiting for someone to uncover them. For centuries, the story of the Library of Alexandria has been one of loss, tragedy, and mystery. The greatest collection of knowledge the ancient world had ever known, containing works by philosophers, mathematicians, scientists, and poets, was destroyed, and with it, the wisdom of generations was thought to be lost forever. But as we've explored in this journey, what if that knowledge was never truly lost? What if it was simply hidden away, waiting for the right time to be revealed? Imagine, for a moment, what would happen if the secrets of the Library of Alexandria were uncovered? If the ancient texts and scrolls that were thought to have been destroyed in the great fires of Alexandria were found, what would we learn? What truths would they reveal about the ancient world, and how might they reshape our understanding of history? These texts could contain answers to questions we've long wondered about. Questions about the origins of civilization, the development of science, and the spiritual beliefs of ancient peoples. Could they offer us insights into lost technologies and knowledge that were far ahead of their time? Or would they challenge the very foundation of modern history, forcing us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about our past? The revelations from these texts could also challenge the way we understand religion. If the knowledge from Alexandria included works that contradicted the Church's teachings, how would that affect the way we view religion today? The Church has long controlled intellectual life in Europe, and much of its power came from its ability to shape the narrative of history and truth. If it were revealed that the Church had suppressed or hidden knowledge that could have changed the course of human understanding, it would call into question the Vatican's role in shaping the modern world. The Vatican's control over knowledge and history has been a cornerstone of its authority for centuries. If the truth about the lost knowledge of Alexandria were revealed, it could weaken the Vatican's hold on intellectual and spiritual life. The Catholic Church, which once had the power to dictate what was considered acceptable knowledge, would no longer be the sole gatekeeper of truth. This could lead to a major shift in the way we think about the relationship between religion, science, and history. The ramifications of such a revelation could be profound. It could spark a revolution in the way we approach knowledge, with a renewed focus on critical thinking, intellectual freedom, and a more open exploration of history. The discovery of these ancient texts could open doors to new ideas, new discoveries, and a deeper understanding of the world around us. But it wouldn't just be scholars and historians who would be affected. The public, too, would be forced to confront the truth about the past. For centuries, we have accepted the version of history that has been passed down to us, shaped by institutions like the church, the state, and academia. If that version of history were proven to be incomplete, distorted, or even fabricated, it could lead to a fundamental shift in how we view our place in the world. It's not just about uncovering ancient knowledge. It's about challenging the very systems of power that have controlled the narrative of history for so long. If the truth about the lost library of Alexandria were to come to light, it could change everything. It would force us to reconsider the past, reshape our understanding of religion and science, and challenge the institutions that have shaped our world for centuries. The legacy of Alexandria, with its lost wisdom and hidden knowledge, could be the key to unlocking a new era of intellectual and spiritual awakening. And perhaps, just perhaps, it is time for that truth to be revealed.